It's just over a month since Senegal's presidential election took place. In the lead-up, opposition candidate and now President Bassirou Diomaye Faye advocated for reducing France's economic dominance on its former colony. But since his election victory, his tune has changed. Jacques Nel, economist at Oxford Economics Africa, joins us to hone in on France's ties with the West African nation in greater detail. Jacques, a pleasure. Good afternoon.
Hi, Nolu. Happy to be here.
Brilliant, Jacques. Maybe let's start off by speaking about, French companies operating in Senegal. Are they concentrated in specific sectors? How dominant are they in that country?
Yes, they are very present and they do dominate some really important sectors. So in telecoms, the telecoms giant Orange has a market share of around 50% in Senegal. SocGen is considered the biggest bank in Senegal. And Bolloré, which is another French multinational, dominates port operations. It should also be considered that foreign direct investment into Senegal, around 50% of that is from French investors regularly. So there's also a big French presence in other sectors beyond those, specifically retail, construction, and agriculture. And just lastly, around 3/4 of tourism revenue in Senegal is from French tourists. And the government has big plans for its tourism sector, so we can expect a lot of French participation in its tourism sector going forward as well.
We'll talk about French firms and how they play within the oil and gas sectors there.
Interestingly, Total, the big French energy giant, isn't developing Senegal's natural gas or oil projects. In the natural gas sector, which is the GTA project, it's British Petroleum, so BP, is the main developer there, in addition to the national energy companies of Senegal and Mauritania. And Sangomar, which is the big oil project in Senegal, is being driven by Australia's Woodside Energy. That being said, Total is doing a lot of searching for natural gas in Senegal. It owns a few major offshore blocks where exploration is ongoing.
Jacques, I'd like us to also give us a snapshot of where we are with that Senegalese economy. We know, COVID-19 came. We've seen other shocks, the Russia-Ukraine war also there. What has that done to the Senegalese economy there? We have seen also debt levels in many African countries becoming an issue. Is this the case for them?
Well, the Senegalese economy is actually doing pretty good. It's shown a lot of growth. A lot of this is due to the development of the hydrocarbon sector. And this development has also pushed up public debt quite considerably. Over the past decade, public debt has gone from 40% of GDP to nearly 80% of GDP now. A lot of this was directed towards the development of the hydrocarbon sector, but it should also be noted that this increase was sort of tolerated with the promise of significant revenues when that sector gets off the ground. There have been significant delays, but we still expect exports to commence at the end of this year. And bringing France back into it, just looking at their debt profile, the biggest bilateral lender to Senegal has been between China and France over the past few decades. China took the lead in 2014 to 19, but then after COVID-19 hit, Chinese loans dropped and the French government gave a lot of concessional loans. So France then took over as the country's biggest bilateral lender. But importantly, since then, France has remained on top, but both of their contributions to lending have dropped, with multilaterals playing, and specifically the IMF, playing a much more important role at the moment.
Putting those bilateral relations with France aside, let's talk about this new leadership and what we are anticipating from it there, Jacques.
As you said, it's only been a month, so it's still a bit too early to say, but we are very optimistic. President Faye and Prime Minister Sonko have really good reputations. It's important to remember that both of them started out as tax practitioners back in the day, and they actually started this opposition movement in opposition to the corruption that they were seeing as tax practitioners. And this opposition movement is in power now. So that bodes well for cleaning up government, and these are the sort of guys you want in power when the country is leading into a hydrocarbons boom. Another point that they campaigned on was addressing unemployment, which is a key socioeconomic issue in Senegal. So really good that they're focusing on that as well. But Yeah, again, it's just a bit too soon to say. As you mentioned, there was some concern in the lead up in the campaign. They did talk about renegotiating contracts and renegotiating debt, but it does look like since they've been put in power, their tone has gone a lot less radical and more pragmatic, which again bodes well going forward. It's still too early to say, but we are optimistic.
And before I let you go, Jacques, what we had seen in West Africa was just this anti-France kind of tone that was really spreading there. We saw all those coups last year. Senegal kind of out of the woods with that, and also maybe even just the region now. Has that kind of died down a little bit?
Well, I think it's important to have some cornerstones which Cote d'Ivoire and Senegal have sort of played in the region. There is still that strong anti-French sentiment, but that makes it so much more makes it so much more of a relief to hear the new leadership in Senegal backtracking on that sort of sentiment that they were riding back then. It is important, to have good relations. A lot of the countries are playing East against West to get the best deals for them. But it is a relief that the new leadership there is going to be a stronghold for French, not just French, but Western more generally, participation in the region.
Brilliant, and an absolute pleasure having you with us today, Jacques. Thank you so much for taking us through these developments. That was Jacques Nel. He's from Oxford Economics Africa.